Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, for our final fireside before next week's election, we'll have a couple of great experts to chat to. The Brennan Center's Katherine Yon Ebright will explain to us the 1798 law that Trump wants to use to deport millions, maybe tens of millions of people from America.
And with the bro vote crucial to Trump's election hopes, I'm going to talk to Rachel Kleinfeld about the changing politics of young American men. But first,
it somehow seems quite appropriate when it comes to 2024 that the biggest scandal of the final week has been all about garbage, the word garbage, and how it's being applied by both sides to the other. It all started, of course, last weekend with controversial comments at Trump's Madison Square Garden rally that quickly became a major headache for the former president's campaign.
This morning, the Trump campaign distancing itself from comedian Tony Hinchcliffe after saying this about Puerto Rico at a Trump rally in New York's Madison Square Garden last night.
I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
The campaign says this joke does not reflect the views of President Trump or the campaign.
But the affair stoked fears in Trump land that Tony Hinchcliffe had managed to alienate hundreds of thousands of American voters of Puerto Rican descent. Plenty of them are in places like Pennsylvania. Trump also refused to directly apologise for Hinchcliffe's comments.
unsurprisingly, the Harris campaign then put out an attack ad about it.
A floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
I will never forget what Donald Trump did. He abandoned the island and offered nothing more than paper towels and insults. Puerto Ricans deserve better. As president, I will always fight for you and your families, and together we can chart a new way forward.
Harris even unveiled a policy to increase access to reliable, affordable electricity in Puerto Rico and then strengthen the island's electric grid against hurricanes, which was quick work to turn that around in like a day. Meanwhile, Harris supporters were building up this one joke into an insight into Donald Trump's entire essence.
This comedian, handpicked, chosen, vetted by the Trump campaign because he reflects what Trump has said his entire lifetime.
But then, John, things changed.
Oh, but they did. After months of being kept basically as far away from the Harris campaign as possible, President Joe Biden delivered the kind of own goal which could have had people questioning his mental acuity all over again, except for the fact he's been making these kinds of gaffes since his political career began in the 1970s.
Donald Trump has no character. He doesn't give a damn about the Latino community. He's failed businessman. He only cares about the billionaire friends he has and accumulating wealth for those at the top. You know, he says immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. Give me a break. He wants to do away with the birthright citizenship. Who the hell has said that in the last 100 years? And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable, and it's un-American. It's totally contrary to everything we've done, everything we've been.
Any garbage is his supporters. Now, Biden was clearly reading notes off his laptop. That was a call to Latino voter groups. And he kind of lost his place. He got mangled up there. He started talking about Delaware. It sounded like he was saying that all Trump supporters are garbage. The White House, though, said, no, he wasn't saying all Trump supporters are garbage. He was just talking about Trump's supporter at that Madison Square Garden rally, Tony Hinchcliffe, the comedian, and possibly some of the other speakers, supporters at the Trump rally. But Trump interpreted it very differently.
250 million Americans are not garbage. This week, Kamala has been comparing her political opponents to the most evil mass murderers in history. And now, speaking on a call for her campaign last night, crooked Joe Biden finally said what he and Kamala really think of our supporters. He called them garbage. No way. No way.
Don't know where he got that 250 million figure from as well. I guess everybody in America who did not vote for Joe Biden in 2020 is added together. Either way, Kamala Harris did suddenly find herself right where Trump had been just a couple of days earlier, being asked to justify or defend the words of a supporter. But of course, this time for Harris, it was the President of the United States, not just some roast comedian.
Have you spoken to President Biden since his comment last night about garbage?
Listen, I think that, first of all, he clarified his comments, but let me be clear, I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for.
OK, then Harris told reporters that she's spoken to Joe Biden since he made the comment, but that the topic of garbage just didn't come up in their chat. Trump isn't letting it go. You might be wondering why he was wearing that high-vis vest at that rally clip a moment ago. Well, it's because he'd just been driving around in circles in a garbage truck.
250 million people are not garbage. I can tell you who the real garbage is, but we won't say that.
No, he won't say that. And then he got in the garbage truck and he drove around for a bit. Now, some have likened Joe Biden's comments to Hillary Clinton's description of Trump supporters as being deplorables back in 2016.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
Others have likened Donald Trump's garbage truck stunt to say, hey, that's like Mike Dukakis with that big helmet when he was driving around in a tank in 1988. Another campaign disaster. It's all a little bit overblown. Trump is being accused of making a gaffe of his own this week as well, defending earlier comments that he'd made that he wanted to be a protector of women, whose fertility rights he's helped to strip away, by the way. He dug himself an even deeper hole yesterday in Wisconsin. Take a look.
And my people told me about 4 weeks ago, I was saying, no, I want to protect the people. I want to protect the women of our country. I want to protect the women. Sir, please don't say that. Why? They said, we think it's very inappropriate for you to say. So why? I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. They said. They said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say, pay these guys a lot of money. Can you believe it? I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
I'm going to do it whether women like it or not. It's kind of curious, Chaz, to see gaffes and campaign stunts backfiring. I mean, it's almost like, in some ways, for this most unconventional campaign, we're getting back into some very conventional kind of silly season politics. Suddenly, people are saying things and it's like, oh, did they mean to say that? Did they really not mean to say that? Was the slip of the tongue actually revealing what they really think about all of this? What do you make of it? Because obviously we'll find out next week what the voters make of it.
Yeah, I forgot how trivial it all was, John. It's like an old friend back again. But we should talk in more detail about this, even though it does seem very trivial. Like you say, elections do ride on these kinds of things.
Yeah, and it's taking the Biden comments are taking up a lot of oxygen, and even if it doesn't change any minds amongst voters, if you're a Trump supporter and says, oh, he's calling us garbage, you weren't going to vote for Harris anyway. But every minute they're talking about this, they're not talking about a positive story for Kamala Harris.
That's absolutely true. Let's start then by trying to work out exactly what Biden meant by that clip you played before. Because as you say, Biden did send out a clarifying tweet soon after. And he said what he was calling garbage was, quote, the hateful rhetoric about Puerto Rico spewed by Trump supporter at his Madison Square Garden rally. That was all he meant to say, tweeted Biden. Now, the White House released a transcript as well, which appeared to back Biden up. Their transcript suggested that Biden was saying, quote, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters' demonization of Latinos. Now, that's a completely different meaning. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But if you read the rest of that sentence, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters' demonization of Latinos is unconscionable and it's un-American. That doesn't make sense at all as a sentence. So that smells. And if you listen to that grab again, it's very clear from Biden's intonation that the word supporters is meant to be the end of a sentence.
Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters, his This demonization of seen as unconscionable.
So that transcript seemed like, well, garbage to me. And apparently it was, because late breaking news, according to the federal workers tasked with recording that transcript, they say White House press officials altered the official transcript. That's for political purposes, John. That seems pretty concerning to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and the Biden White House has been accused a number of times of altering the official transcript of remarks given, and often a speech will be speech as prepared, speech as delivered, and then it's a question of what goes into, with all of these printouts or things that are going into the official record, what version becomes the official record. And they have the same issue with, Senate debates and everything else. This is fascinating because clearly the White House, in trying to clean up / cover up what Biden said, they've said, okay, yep, here are the notes. You federal work, you government workers, you put this on the record as we say it was. And this person, who's basically a couple of stenographers, have been told this. Maybe they're pro-Trump stenographers, or maybe they're just very diligent, non-partisan government employees. But they've said, well, no, that's not what he said. This does not reflect that. The transcript is different to that. I'm not falsifying this because I've got to sign off on this. I'm not going to lie. So it's really interesting, and it reminds you of the old Nixon quote, it's the cover-up that gets you.
Yeah.
This is a cover-up. I mean, the fact is, Biden mangled whatever words were in front of him on that laptop computer, which is operating as a little auto cue for him, and he kind of stuffed things up. Did he leave out some words like garbage is coming from his supporters? Was he talking about his supporters' garbage as in, well, the garbage that's, that if there's any garbage in the ocean, it's coming from Trump supporters and American people. And I mean, goodness knows what he was trying to say. But as I said earlier, I mean, Joe Biden has been saying things that don't make sense or sound weird. Like he literally, every political campaign he's been involved with has been full of Joe Biden gaffes, and now he's putting gaffes into Kamala Harris's campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, I think this is worse than them just handing a piece of paper and saying, oh, this is what he said, because, look, we're going to hear more about this for sure. This is only just broken. We are definitely going to hear more about this. But it seems that what happened, and first blush, is that the official transcribers made a transcript and then it was altered.
Yep.
It was played with, it was meddled with afterwards by people whose job it isn't to mess with the transcript.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
but
bad.
If we all sat down and tried to transcribe what Joe Biden actually said, particularly when there are words that are inaudible and everything else, there are going to be differences of opinion.
Sure.
And you have people that have to sign off on these things and fact check them and everything else. And if you're the person in the Biden press office who wrote the original comments, it's like this is what he was trying to say. So I know the intent of what he was trying to say, and he kind of got there, but he kind of started talking about Delaware. I mean, obviously it's kind of a reminder as to why they pulled the guy out of the election, because if Biden was still the candidate, we'd have been talking about one of these every week.
Totally. I mean, this is such a confirmation of why he needed to pull out. But like, on Biden, back to him for a second. There is a middle ground on what he meant. And this is what I actually believe, not that stupid transcript. Hear me out now.
Sure.
What if Joe Biden isn't as sharp as he used to be?
Fascinating theory, Chaz.
And what if Biden was trying to say, the only garbage I see floating around is his supporters like Tony Hinchcliffe, but Biden completely forgot Tony Hinchcliffe's name?
Yep.
I wouldn't be surprised by that. And so he then went generic off the cuff by just saying his supporters.
Yep.
That would make sense to me, because Biden's an experienced politician.
Yep.
He's not the kind of person who's going to call out 75 million voters as garbage for no reason whatsoever 4 days before an election.
Yep.
But calling Hinchcliffe garbage as a cheap turnaround, he could do that.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Well, I mean, whether it's any of us, whether we've got a cognitive issue or not, we tend to, if we blank on something, we tend to fill in the space with other words. Similarly for Biden, Tony Hinchcliffe is not super famous. He's well known in certain circles in the United States. Joe Biden has probably never heard of Tony Hinchcliffe before. I hadn't heard of Tony Hinchcliffe until last Sunday.
Yeah.
If Biden sees Hinchcliffe written down, even if the name is there, Tony Hinchcliffe is there, Biden could get to that moment in the script and think, I'm going to dodge that. His supporter, that guy, the senator, Biden does it a lot when he blanks on a name. Yeah. And if he's thinking, I don't want to get the name wrong, because that'll be a gaffe. So I'm not going to try and say Hinchcliffe. So look, any number of things could happen. But bottom line of this is I do not believe that Joe Biden, for all his faults as a politician and as a campaigner, I don't believe that he would be sitting there saying Donald Trump supporters are garbage. He just wouldn't say that.
As in all his supporters.
He's too good a politician. You don't get where Joe Biden is today by saying what they're accusing him of saying, which is Trump supporters are garbage. No, he's saying some of those clowns at that Madison Square Garden rally, they were garbage. The guy who was saying Puerto Ricans live on an island of garbage, he's garbage. That's the only garbage I see.
He needs to take lessons from Australians. He needs to start calling people old mate.
Yeah.
That's what he needs to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should move on, but I'll just flag one thing. This story's only just broken, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going off the top of my head.
Sure.
But it does occur to me that this is an official record.
Yeah.
If someone who isn't in the position, who isn't supposed to mess with an official record, messes with an official record, that's breaking a law. Yeah. So we may hear more about that.
So this person who's going to be out of a job in January is going to be sacked even sooner.
Maybe. And also the point you made before, I think, is spot on, which is what aren't we talking about now when we're talking about gaffes? And that is, we're not talking about tariffs, we're not talking about deficits, we're not talking about deportations, we're not talking about the things that are going to matter over the next 4 years because we're too busy talking about garbage. So why don't we do slightly better than everyone else, John, and move to an important topic?
Yes, because certainly some of these policy thought bubbles could become reality very, very soon. Donald Trump, for example, has promised and indeed threatened to do a lot of things if he's re-elected next week. Some of them, like his pledge to impose tariffs of 60, 100, even 200% on all imports from China and a 20% tariff on all imports from other nations, including Australia, would have a massive economic impact in the United States. Modelling shows that it would leave American families literally thousands of dollars a year worse off as higher prices are passed on to consumers. Trump has also vowed to deport the estimated 11 million undocumented migrant workers who are living in America. Some of them have been in the United States literally for decades now. Trump has even claimed without evidence that there are closer to 30 million illegal immigrants in America. But either way, removing them would cause massive disruption to the American job market and the broader American economy.
Yeah, deporting 10 million workers who are concentrated in just a few industries, by the way, could easily lead to massive labour shortages. It could lead to inflation. The Pearson Institute's projecting it could also reduce GDP by over 7% by 2028. It would take a bite out of Social Security as well, because these people pay Social Security taxes, but they don't actually get Social Security payments. And perhaps most importantly, it would potentially separate 5 million American citizen kids from their unauthorised migrant parents. Now, the mooted future leader of this deportation drive, ex-ICE Chief Tom Homan, was asked about this issue of splitting up families, and this is what he said.
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
Why should a child who is an American citizen have to pack up and move to a country that they don't know?
Because their parent absolutely entered the country illegally, had a child knowing he was in the country illegally, so he created that crisis.
Yikes.
Indeed. One of the tools at Trump's disposal is a law dating back to the early years of the American Republic. It's the Alien Enemies Act of 1798.
We have to get all of these criminals, these murderers and drug dealers and everything, we're getting them out. And we'll put these vicious and bloodthirsty criminals in jail or kick them the hell out of our country, and we'll get them out. Ideally, we want to get them out because we don't want to have to pay for their room and board for the next 50 years, right? To expedite removals of the Trinidad Aragua group and the MS-13 other savage gangs, I'll invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Did you know that? I had to go back that far. We couldn't find anything because modern day politicians, even sort of old time, nobody had the courage of these original people.
So, what is this Alien Enemies Act and how might it be deployed? Katherine Yon Ebright is the counsel at the Brennan Center's Liberty and National Security Program. Katherine, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So this Alien Enemies Act, Catherine, has been around for years and years. Can you give us a bit of a sense as to how it's been used in the past?
Yeah, so the Alien Enemies Act is a law passed in 1798 in the United States, so about a decade after the founding of the country. It is a wartime authority. It has been used 3 times, each time in a major conflict. So first in the War of 1812, then in World War I, and lastly in World War II. For the first 2 invocations, 1812 and World War I, that was in response to an explicitly declared war. World War II, the Alien Enemies Act was invoked after Pearl Harbor, which President Roosevelt identified as a quote-unquote invasion that triggered the law. And across these uses of the Alien Enemies Act, the law has been used for mass ancestry-based internment.
Okay, so how could Trump theoretically use the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 in 2024 to make a mass deportation easier?
So by invoking this wartime authority, the president can unlock sweeping powers, the authority to regulate non-citizens from a supposed enemy nation, the natives or citizens of that enemy nation, regulate them, but also to summarily detain or summarily deport them. And so that means that there would be no hearing, no trial, and the president doesn't need to ask the Congress for, new authorities that would allow him to say the non-citizens of the enemy nation can't be found in location X, Y, and Z, or can't be present in these kinds of facilities. And so it is a way to bypass conventional immigration and conventional criminal law. And that's why it's such a potent tool and a dangerous tool. If a president is trying to invoke it in peacetime, frankly, even in wartime, we've seen this authority lead to troubling violations of people's equal protection rights and due process rights, as when we had Japanese internment, as well as the internment of German and Italian non-citizens during World War II.
Catherine, certainly since the Second World War, this piece of legislation has been widely condemned as racist, even by Congress itself, yet they have not repealed it. Why is that?
I think there's not been appropriate attention given to the Alien Enemies Act and the wrongs that have been done under it. And so in the US public school system, you rarely talk about or hear about the internment of non-citizens of German and Italian descent under the Alien Enemies Act. And we often think of Japanese internment and the reparations regime for Japanese internment as something that primarily and exclusively sometimes targeted US citizens of Japanese descent. And so the role of the Alien Enemies Act isn't always clear to the public and even to the lawmakers in some of those horrific events from World War II. And so, again, I think that there's been a lack of attention paid to this authority, and that if we really take stock of the history of this law, the case for repeal becomes quite clear, unless, again, you are intending to abuse this law and, are following a president who would like to use this law for a way to bypass conventional immigration and criminal law.
As you say, Catherine, this is a wartime power, but this is not a war, as much as conservatives like to speak of a migrant invasion. So do you have any sense of whether the courts would allow Trump to use the Alien Enemies Act?
It's a little uncertain what the courts would do, right? So this would be an abuse of the Alien Enemies Act, which is a wartime authority, as you said. But at the same time, the basis for invoking the Alien Enemies Act would be Trump's identification of a quote-unquote invasion perpetrated by a quote-unquote foreign nation or government. And so he would say migration is the invasion, and he would say that cartels are de facto or acting as a foreign government of, say, Mexico or Venezuela. And while those arguments may seem facially absurd and inappropriate, they're actually on issues that the courts rarely second guess the president. And so there's something in American jurisprudence called the political question doctrine. If it's a political question, the courts don't get involved. They leave it to the president or they leave it to the Congress to make those critical fact determinations. The presence or absence of an invasion has historically been treated as a political question that the courts don't address. The identification or recognition of foreign governments, likewise, has been identified as a political question that's inappropriate for the courts to weigh in on. And so you can see how, if this doctrine is used robustly by the Supreme Court and the lower courts, it could actually allow the judiciary to punt on a pretextual, inappropriate, and abusive invocation of the Alien Enemies Act.
And would it only be unlawful, undocumented migrants in the United States who would be swept up in this, or could somebody who is lawfully in the United States still be deported because of their migrant background?
There's nothing in the law that would limit an invocation of the Alien Enemies Act to undocumented individuals. Once the law is applied to a particular country, it applies to all of the natives and citizens of that country who are not themselves US citizens. And so if you are a non-citizen and you come from Mexico and Trump claims that a cartel is the de facto government of Mexico, or you're from Venezuela, you're not a US citizen, and Trump claims that a gang is the de facto government of Venezuela. Even if you are a green card holder, a permanent resident, a visa holder, an asylum seeker, you have lawful status in the United States. You could be swept up into this kind of program with no legal difficulty under the scope of the Alien Enemies Act. And so again, it's a very broad, it's an outdated, and it's a dangerous authority.
Now, Katherine, estimates of this kind of operation approach $1 trillion. So what if the Democrats just said, no, we're not funding that? Would the Alien Enemies Act allow Trump to bypass Congress and fund it himself just by shuffling funds around?
So there are ways to reprogram funds within the US legal system, but the funding is a big hangup. It's unclear where the appropriations would come from because the Alien Enemies Act is not a funding authority. It is an authorization, but it needs to be complemented by appropriations. And so that's a great point that you raised, and it's something that lawyers right now are looking into. What are the appropriations issues with the proposed mass deportations? And what are other logistical issues, right, in terms of personnel, actually moving federal officers? And there's some talk, too, about using the military as a part of this mass detention and deportation program. And so there have to be all of the parts and pieces. Simply having the authority is not enough.
Katherine Yon Ebright, thanks for having a fireside chat with us.
Thank you.
Well, we're almost at the end of the campaign and things are getting very gendered. Kamala Harris is running more ads about abortion. Trump is saying things like that clip you played before about how he's going to protect women whether they like it or not. And Harris super PACs are now running ads telling women that voting for Harris can be their little secret from the man in their lives.
Your turn, honey.
In the one place in America where women still have a right to choose, you can vote any way you want. And no one will ever know.
Did you make the right choice?
Sure did, honey.
Remember, what happens in the booth stays in the booth. Vote Harris Walls. Vote Common Good is responsible for the contents of this ad.
And if you thought ads can't get much more gendered than that, well, strap yourself in, because Elon Musk's super PAC ran probably the tackiest ad of this campaign, and maybe offensive even by my standards. They've since taken it down after it really didn't work out for them. Have a look at this.
Warning, this ad contains multiple instances of the C word. Viewer discretion is advised. Kamala Harris is a C word. You heard that right, a big old C word. In fact, all of the other C words think she's the biggest C word of them all. That's right, she's a tax-hiking, regulation-loving, gun-grabbing communist. And the worst part, she's proud of it. Kamala Harris, the C word America simply can't afford. See you nationwide, Tuesday, November 5th.
That's really bad, especially that last line, really bad.
Did Tony Hinchcliffe write that ad?
I wouldn't be surprised. Look, we've never seen elections this polarised by gender before, John. Where does this lead?
Yeah, really interesting. That first ad, the Harris ad, targeting women married to Republican men, and saying, you don't even have to tell him that it's going to be your little secret. That's a fascinating ad. Julia Roberts doing the voiceover. That's interesting as well, given that still her best known role is Pretty Woman. What layers of meaning there might be in that. It's countering, though. There's a very, very strong push amongst Christian conservative men which goes to this whole notion of Christian headship, and that the wife should be voting in line with the husband's decision. And so they're countering that. Jesse Waters on Fox News the other day was saying if his wife voted differently to him, it would be D-Day, as in Divorce Day. So there is this narrative amongst some conservative men that the women in their lives should be voting along the same lines. But of course, women, they know that they have been taking responsibility for things, including controlling their fertility, for millennia in different ways. This is kind of an extension of that. This is a nod and a wink to that. So I think it's very clever advertising.
Yeah, the interesting thing about all this for me, though, is that the fact is more women vote. There's more of them in America, and they turn out in high percentages. So if America did literally become polarised by gender to the point where all Democrats are women and all Republicans are men, well, the Democrats would win.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that's necessarily a winning strategy for the Republicans.
Yeah, Democrats have long had a massive advantage amongst women of colour.
Yeah.
But this could be the first time that they win a majority of all white women. It's possible that it'll happen. They're already doing it with white women with a college degree, but it could be all white women in this election if some of the polls are right, because Harris has got a 16, 17, 18% margin right now over Donald Trump.
Certainly whoever is most polarised by sex may well win the election because of that. But Kamala Harris's final message is mostly focusing not on that, just focusing on the economy.
Next January, one of us will be president. If it's Donald Trump, he will wake up every day and stew over his enemies list. That will help no one. If I am president, I'll be focused on my to-do list for you, the American people. I'll cut costs by cracking down on corporate price gouging, make housing more affordable, lower taxes for middle-class families, and protect Social Security. I will focus on getting things done. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message. Let's get to work.
And this is Trump's final message.
Kamala backed Biden on everything. She was the deciding vote for his disastrous economic agenda. They raised taxes on the middle class, and prices soared. Kamala was in charge of his open border policies, giving welfare to illegals while Americans struggle, and their weakness invited wars. Now Kamala wants to double down on failure. It's time to turn the page on Joe and Kamala's failed agenda. President Trump fights for you. His strength kept us safe. Trump cut taxes for families. Prices were lower and the border secure. Now, President Trump can do it again.
And we are going to launch a new golden age of American success for the citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed.
Remember, Kamala broke it. President Trump will fix it.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
What do you think of the messages, John?
Interesting to see Harris closing positive there. Trump, admittedly, it was basically two ads in one. It was a negative ad followed by a positive ad, setting up a contrast. Everything has been terrible under Harris. Everything was great under Trump, and it's going to be great again. So both of them very effective, very, I guess, kind of predictable, standard kinds of ads. That Trump is not letting go of the negative. He's still running sort of angry-looking pictures of Kamala Harris in his closing message, could say that he's still worried about losing. And right now, of course, both sides should be worried about losing, because both sides have an almost identically equal chance of losing this election just a few days out.
Certainly, that is the case. Although I couldn't help noticing that scent of malarkey wafting from Trump's ad.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, I think it might have been. Roll that intro.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Now, I don't know if you guys ever check up on the pull quotes that you see in those ads, but that's my idea of a good time. And just for once, it really paid off. So let me take you through it. First, there was this one here. Harris is seeking to significantly raise taxes. Except the original pull quote from the New York Times was actually, Harris is seeking to significantly raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans and large corporations. They forgot to mention that bit there. Then there was this headline from CBS News. Harris vows to keep Biden's border. Except the actual headline was, Harris vows to keep Biden's border crackdown. The United States is a sovereign nation. Well, I guess they didn't have room to fit that into the ad there. How about this pull quote from NBC? Welfare for illegals. Now that one's fine, except if you look really carefully at the fine print there, the article is from March 28, 2018. Well before the Biden administration. And finally, there's this headline here from Axios, Global War. When surprisingly, that was not the whole headline. The headline was actually, US not ready for global war, Commission warns. The article is actually about military preparation. It had nothing to do with the administration. So, John, we end this campaign as we started it and as we experienced it in the middle, for that matter, with a whole heap of malarkey. Yeah. Now, I know it's not a news flash, ads may not be honest, John, but is that taking things a bit too far?
Way too far. It's deceptive advertising. It is illegal. Yeah. But of course, these things, as we know, with so much around campaigns, there's campaign finance or whatever, they get around to trying to prosecute it in a couple of years from now. Ironic, though, good pickup on this, but ironic that this is all happening in the same week as Donald Trump has launched a $10 million lawsuit against CBS for interviewing Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes and then editing the interview, which he says was misleading. Those headlines are a lot more misleading than the edit of the Kamala Harris interview. So, I think Trump probably owes Axios and NBC and CBS and the rest of them about $10 million each.
He always pays his debts, don't worry, John. We mentioned the gendered campaign before. Now to a demographic we might be talking about a lot more after next week, and that is young men. While polls have shown Democrats underperforming amongst young voters generally, it does seem like the real story in this campaign is young men moving right. The New York Times averaged polls throughout the year and they found Biden and Harris leading amongst young women, 62 to 31, but Donald Trump led amongst young men, 55 to 38. And the interesting thing about this is that young voters usually lean left, so that's the surprise, the right part with the men. But this trend of young men leaning right, it's continued to the latest polls as well. The Washington Post poll recently found women under 30 favouring Harris by 20 points and men under 30 favouring Trump by 15 points. Now, not every poll shows exactly those kinds of results. They do vary greatly with these very fine demographic slicings. But a number of polls have Trump leading young men by double digits. And it's not new either. Since 2020, the share of young men identifying as registered Democrats has dropped by 7 percentage points, while those identifying as Republicans has increased by 7 percentage points. So that's a net shift of 14 percentage points in 4 years. Interestingly, at the same time, we're seeing other trends involving young men as well. Young men are lonelier than ever. They're nearly twice as likely to be single as women their age. Gen Z men are less likely to enroll in college or the workforce than previous generations. They've got higher rates of suicide. They're less likely than their female peers to receive treatment for mental health maladies as well. I could keep going on. They are not happy campers. So are these two trends related? What is going on with young men? I spoke to Rachel Kleinfeld before. She's an expert on how political violence is affecting American politics and someone, by the way, who's been studying this exact trend. Let's see what she had to say. Now, are young men actually moving right, or does it just seem that way because young women are moving left?
It's a little bit of both. Young women are moving left at a very rapid pace, and they're moving quite left. Young men are a mix. A lot of them are basically shuffling a little bit actually to the left. They're not actually moving right, but because young women are moving so far, they're moving a little. But some are moving to the right. In America, we're seeing a particular movement among Black and Hispanic men who are young, who had never been on the right before, moving toward the right.
And in your view, why is this all happening?
There's a lot of explanations for why men might be doing this kind of voting with with their gender identity in mind. One is, of course, that women have gained a lot of power over the last few decades in consolidated democracies. And when men feel under threat from women, they might be voting in a backlash sort of a manner. Another theory is that men are feeling kind of threatened in the cultural sphere, not just power, but sort of more generally speaking. And they're trying to reassert a kind of patriarchal sense that they hold some kind of control. It's not just about gender relations. I should say when people lose a sense of agency, when they lose a sense of control over their lives more broadly, they can assert that in the political sense of things. And so they might be asserting that through voting because they're losing control because of AI and more general technological and other changes. We also think that some men are losing out educationally and in the sort of ability to compete in the working world and the economic world, and might be taking that out politically on women.
Now, Rachel, people on the left might not like men moving to the right very much, but maybe the political ramifications of this are the least of the issues. Are there any other tendencies from these same young men that are more problematic for society, or is this just a voting thing?
Well, I think there are many reasons to really worry when the genders start coming as far apart, not only in who they vote for, but in what that means, what those votes mean. Because, of course, women are facing a real backlash in the United States against abortion. They're also facing a sense of real violent misogyny, not just in the United States, but worldwide. We're seeing a real violent resurgence against female politicians and other female leaders in public life, largely in established democracies. But of course, you can go to Afghanistan where it's just horrific. That's really taking women back into pre-medieval times. So this backlash is really quite threatening to women's gains over the years, but it's also threatening to home life. It's very hard to maintain a strong family if your men and women have such different ideas about what their gender roles should be within that family and what they can expect. And so particularly for young men and young women who are starting out and who are cisgender or straight, they're looking for a partner who shares their beliefs. And as those beliefs diverge more and more, it'll affect family life and the children that come from those families.
Now, Rachel, something we've covered many times on this show are these so-called missing men that have been dropping out of the labour force for decades now, like 50 years. I don't know what exactly they do, to be honest, but is this somehow related to them?
You know, it's hard to say whether the voting patterns are directly related because a lot of those people don't vote. They're really dropping out of everything. They don't show up in clubs, they don't go to events, they don't have groups that they belong to, they're not in religious institutions, they don't vote, and they don't work, as you say, and they're not in school. As you say, we really don't know what they're doing, maybe sitting in the basement playing video games. It's affecting an awful lot of men. Now, whether it's affecting their voting behavior is unknown because a lot of them don't vote, but whether it's affecting the culture for men to be sort of dropping out, falling back, refusing to compete, of course that affects the culture. It makes it very hard to have equality when one group is refusing to race.
Okay, so where did these young men come from? Why have they become so prominent in the last few years, and what happens to them in the future?
Well, you know, the trend toward women overtaking men in educational institutions in developed democracies is still pretty new. We moved very quickly from women being behind, in large part because they were held back by all men's schools and a sense that women were going to just marry and leave the workforce in the 1950s and 60s. They went from being quite behind and needing help to catch up to then surpassing men, in large part, I think, because the whole educational system is really set up to favor girls and women in their brain development. You know, boys just need a little extra time to mature in the ability to sit down in a desk and learn. And if you start kids off at 5, 6 years old and expect them all to do the same, the girls are naturally going to pull ahead. The boys are going to feel left behind. And as that exacerbates over time, particularly when you have fewer and fewer male teachers and more female teachers who don't really connect with that kind of young boy energy and what you might need to do to teach them, boys are leaning back further and further. So this is a pretty new phenomena that we're seeing in our educational institutions and in our politics.
Rachel, education seems to play a prominent role in this discussion. We've seen about, 60% of college attendees being women for a while now. Is there a danger that education becomes stereotyped as largely a female thing?
Of course there's a danger. I mean, already young boys see most of their teachers as female. Very few men go into the teaching professions now. And so the idea that the whole educational sphere might be feminine is likely to grow. Add that to the idea that men might be telling them, you shouldn't need to jump through hoops set by women. And if you have mostly women teachers, that makes it a very mixed message for young boys. And they're starting to hear this from the manosphere at quite young ages, 10, 11, 12. And so the likelihood that they don't really respect these female teachers grows. So you're really just setting up a lot of social friction that ultimately will hurt boys in the job market, where you do tend to need college degrees and so on, but will also just hurt society, because we need men in the world. They're half the population. We need them to play a role of equality. And if what we have is a bifurcation where men are either at the nosebleed top, like an Elon Musk, or they're quite low in the social hierarchy, that's setting up a recipe for men to be jealous of other men, and men to be frustrated with women, and young men who are frustrated and jobless. That is a recipe for social violence and that sort of thing. So this is a problem for all of us to tackle. It's not just a male problem.
Finally, Rachel, leaving aside all the current young men and the issues they might be having, how do we stop this becoming more of a problem for future generations?
Well, I think one thing that would be very good is to bring back groups that are just for men and boys, led in a more pro-social way. We used to have lots of those kinds of things, Boy Scouts and other groups that were only for men, and actually the problem was a dearth of groups for women. Now, if you go to any elementary school, you'll see all sorts of groups that are either explicitly for women, kind of strong girl groups, STEM for girls, that kind of thing, or they're not explicitly for women, but they overtly attract many more women, like choir and other activities. And so there just aren't that many places where boys are coming together, but then with a role model who is in real life, not just on the internet, and is pro-social and pro-women as well as men. Those spaces that help boys learn to be men have really disappeared in modern life. And men need them, boys need them, and they need them to be guided in a certain direction. Otherwise, they're learning how to be boys and men from Andrew Tate and really pretty nasty influences that they find on the internet when they're looking for how to build muscle or how to date or other questions they're searching for.
Rachel Kleinfeld, thank you so much for joining us on the Fireside Chat.
Thank you.
Now, we are just about out of time. Usually at this point, we'd probably run through the latest opinion polls, take you through the averages in the swing states and nationally, but there's probably no point right now because this does remain a toss-up. Harris is still in front nationally. Trump is leading in enough of the swing states to win. That is, if the polls are all exactly right. They're all within the margin of error. So this, I guess, is less of a poll check than a gut check right now, Chaz, because there are 4 possible outcomes next week: a tiny Trump win, a big Trump win, a tiny Harris win, and a big Harris win, because all of these polls could actually landslide in one way or another.
Absolutely. 1.5 points in either direction could lead to any of those outcomes, as you say. I think that people aren't fully understanding just how much of a difference the likely voter model that we impose on polls makes to the result. And what I mean by that, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, is that when pollsters are trying to work out who is a likely voter and who isn't, they ask a number of questions about the voters. And that determines who ends up being in the poll and how much they weight it accordingly. And just to give you an example I'm talking about, a pollster this week put out to expose how this works, they put out a bunch of assumptions. There were questions they would ask. And they put out 2 sets of questions where they took one set of answers on one side and the other set of answers on the other side. And both answers were perfectly reasonable. Like neither of them was a hack job. They were both reasonable questions to ask. It was 50-50 situation which way you go. If you picked one set of answers, the data led to a Harris lead by 0.9 of a point. If you took the other set of answers, it led to a Harris lead by 9 points. So there was 8 points difference, depending on which set of assumptions you took. And every pollster makes those kinds of decisions. And so we just don't know. What we're looking at the moment, when it's this close, what we're looking at is the top of an iceberg, and we have no idea what is underwater. And we will have no idea until Election Day.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've said it time and time again, with non-compulsory voting, you do not know which of the 1 in 3 eligible voters are not going to vote at the end of the day. With the early voting, we talked about this on Planet America this week, the early voting numbers really not a good indication of anything because if you go by party registration, there's nothing to stop a registered Democrat voting for a Republican or a registered Republican from voting for a Democrat. So it really doesn't tell you very much. The gender breakdown of early voting as well. People are saying, oh, a lot more women are voting. Maybe that's a good time for Democrats. Yeah, maybe it is. The bottom line is all of these breadcrumbs that are out there and the betting markets, the probability models, all of these things. Ultimately, this time next week, if we have a result, we will look back and we'll see the trail of breadcrumbs that led to this moment. We'll say, the signs were there. We should have known, because the get out the vote operation that Trump outsourced to Elon Musk that we find out this week has been locking people in U-Haul trailers. They didn't know what they were doing. Whereas the Democrats, you know, for all their faults, they know how to get out the vote. They've been having to do it for decades and decades and decades. So it will seem very logical once we know what the answer is. We just don't know what that answer is.
Absolutely. I just want to say 3 things about Election Day, because the next time we see you is after Election Day. The first thing is that Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, we all know they're the 3 key states. All 3 of them are not going to be done on Election Day unless it's a landslide. If it's coming down to mail-in votes and early votes, they will not be done on Wednesday. So we, in all likelihood, will not know the result on Wednesday. But
unless we can say Trump has clearly won Michigan, in which case Harris probably can't win.
Well, that's what I said. That's what I'm saying. If there's a landslide situation in one of those states, then we'll know. But short of a landslide in one of those states, look at North Carolina. Because if North Carolina is traditionally one of the first to complete their count, they're usually a fast counting state. If Harris is doing well in North Carolina, if Harris wins North Carolina, you'll know if she wins North Carolina on Election Day. If she wins North Carolina, it's over. Harris has won. If she doesn't win North Carolina, then strap yourself in. We might be there for a while. That's the first thing. Second thing, if Harris wins, if Harris is winning, pay attention to Nebraska, the Senate seat in Nebraska, because that's the only way she's getting 50 seats in the Senate. If she doesn't get 50 seats in the Senate, she's in for a hell of at least the next 2 years. It'll be a nightmare for her. That's if she wins the presidency. So that's the second thing you look out for. And the third thing that you look out for is
the House, and whether Trump going to New York actually wins a couple of seats on Long Island?
Let's call it that, because I forgot my number 3 was. that could be our number 3 together.
You're the new Rick Perry. You're going to get rid of three government departments. Well, you got time between now and Wednesday night to think about what that other one was as well.
I'll tell you on Wednesday.
Okay, or on the podcast maybe. That's it for the Fireside Chat. We will see you for a special live election night special, 8 p.m. Wednesday night, for a full hour on ABC News, and at the usual time of 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV.
And we're going to have a post-election Fireside Chat at the same time next Friday. And there's also, don't forget, the Pep podcast. We put one up 2 days ago, and there's another one going up on Sunday. So much pep.
Bye-bye.
See ya.